So today I'll be talking about organic inputs for improving crop health and productivity for organic farmers. Why should we focus on inputs? Well, first of all, they're essential for sustainable production because crop removal takes nutrients out of the soil and over time depletes the soil. So crop removal in and of itself necessitates replenishment, and organic matter inputs can improve soil quality. Currently, there's a dizzying array of options in all categories, hundreds of products and dozens of suppliers to choose from. And this often makes it difficult for an organic producer to choose the right inputs. So today we'll be talking about the different classes of inputs and the costs and benefits of each that you'll have to consider for them to be successfully used on your farm. Back in 2011, a project here at Ohio State University surveyed organic vegetable growers throughout the region and asked a number of questions, one of which was to assess the different challenges to crop health and productivity. And you'll see that the four highest ones fell into two categories: pest management and then also high input costs. So clearly there was a recognition on the part of growers that there was a need to utilize inputs, but they felt that the high input cost was preventing them from being successful. So what are the inputs that are required for success? Inputs broadly are land, labor, and capital. These provide foundational capacity to produce crops. Of course, light, water, temperature, soil, and crop choice really are the basis of farming, but it's the control of each of these that constrains productivity. Clearly, if you're growing crops out in the field, the control of the first four is quite limited once you have decided on place, but you can manage what you have in place. And if you decide to build some infrastructure, you can even control the environmental conditions to a limited degree. Grower and worker knowledge also play a big role in success, and there's the need for both training and on-the-job problem solving. Observation, effort, and timing of responses are critical for success, and this is one of the reasons why organic farming is considered more costly in terms of investment than conventional farming, because the timing of certain practices does require flexibility that those who are part-time conventional farmers do find that they are unable to offer to the land. Lastly, in terms of capital, investments and income are needed to operate. Goods and services are purchased to achieve success, and these are some of the ones that we'll be talking about today. And ultimately, there needs to be a return on investment required to increase a grower's income. Material inputs can increase income, but they are not guaranteed to. Going back to that survey, it's clear that some inputs cost much more than growers feel that they might get in return. So how do they get that return on investment? That's what we'll be talking about today. Now, there are four major types of inputs for classes. The first, infrastructure, equipment, and machinery, we will not be discussing much at length today, primarily because they deserve their own webinar, and the presenter should be coming from both an economics and or an engineering background to provide meaningful input with regards to the value of those different options. Today we'll be talking more about the biological and environmental controls related to seeds and cultivars, fertility amendments, and pest management inputs. I will briefly say with regards to infrastructure that the NOP rules focus on two things that we need to pay attention to if we're going to be successful. The first is you must not contaminate the soil. This requires one to avoid treated wood in constructed buildings and fence posts, and also to keep equipment clean and running well, because there is the possibility of contamination by oil leakage, etc. There's also required buffer zones where mixed operations are occurring, and clean out of that equipment then becomes a requirement for maintaining the certification of the organic crops grown on that land. But ultimately, the investments in infrastructure, equipment, and machinery should go beyond compliance. They should allow for good soil management, they should be scale appropriate and well maintained, and they should promote your success by allowing you to be more efficient in your cropping practices and perhaps extending the season. Work done in the Vegetable Production Laboratory headed by Matt Kleinhens here at the OARDC provides lots of resources for vegetable growers in particular who are interested in improving their overall income by extending the season through the use of high tunnels and related practices. So today, as I mentioned, there's going to be 3 main sections to my talk. And after each one of these, I will open it up for questions. On the sideboard of your computer, you'll see a place where you can type in questions, and those questions then will be read to me by our moderator, who will need to unmute his microphone before that happens. So, with regards to seed, you have to remember the requirements that are put forward in the NOP regulations, that organically sourced seeds must be used unless they're not commercially available, that they may not be treated with prohibited substances, though there are a growing number of acceptable seed treatments that are being offered, and the seeds must not be genetically engineered in any way. For those who are doing transplants and are not producing from seed, the planting stock must be certified, and if it's a perennial crop, it can be sold as organic, but only after the planting stock has been maintained under an organic management system for a period of a year or more. One of the biggest questions that we often get here in the OEFFA program is, where can I find organic seed of one type or another? Just in the past 2 years, an international cooperative have put together a very effective website called the Organic Seed Finder, and on that site you'll be able to find a number of vendors as well as information about certification of seed and different organic seed resources. You can click on the types of seeds that you're looking for, and you can find a variety of options. Now, this does not include all sources of organic seed, but for those who want to find the highest quality seed, it does focus in on suppliers that provide certified seed. Secondarily, when you are considering your choice of seed, you need to not only consider the market demands, but also cultivar performance. You can find information about cultivar performance from a variety of sources. These include the local state extension systems as well as eOrganic, and even in seed catalogs you'll find information related to pest and disease resistance capacities, those phenotypes that are present within the different varieties. Using that information in combination with your knowledge of the prevailing pest and disease problems in your area and for your type of growing conditions can help you select cultivars and varieties that will be most productive for you. With regards to performance, I'm going to talk just briefly about agronomic crops and give you an example of the type of information that you can get both on the web from Extension Services. Through Kentucky State University, in cooperation with Organic Valley, there has been a large multi-site variety trial done of corn. This data and the slides I'm about to present to you were kindly donated by Jake Schmitz from Organic Valley, as well as extension people at Kentucky State University. What I hope to point out is the need for a large number of sites to really assess the quality differences in terms of expected productive potential. These variety trials were done across multiple states, and conventional trials are done both within individual states as well as across larger regions. Typically, you need to have 10 or more sites to get really good statistical separation between the different varieties. And here you can see the results of the organic corn variety trial test from 2013. A variety of hybrids from different suppliers is presented here, and the statistical separation gives you the overall yield potential across the entire region. And as you can see, at the low end, the hybrids are producing around 130 bushels, and at the high end, about 200. So the range is typically within an order of about 50%, but most of them are falling plus or minus 10% of the average. When you see performance data that is greater than 20%, different from a cultivar perhaps that you had used previously, or between two cultivars, that is a threshold that is definitely worth acting upon. Why do I say plus or minus 20%? Because this is an indication of the range of success that could occur on different farms. So here what you have is the average yields for each of the trials across all the different locations. And again, you can see that there's a range of about a factor of 2, from a little under 100 bushels per acre to over 200 bushels per acre, with most of them running around 150 plus or minus 20% between 180 and 120. These farm-to-farm effects are very important to recognize, that the performance that you get from a particular variety will vary by location and the soil resources, as well as the management intensity that's applied. Why did these sites perform more poorly than these sites? It's a combination of factors: the prevailing weather, the underlying soil fertility, and the effectiveness of management in that particular growing year. Now, with regards to corn, hybrids are sold according to their maturity dates, and while there is a positive relationship between season length and the amount of yield that is possible, you can see that it really comes out to about 1.6 bushels per degree day in maturity, but there's a huge spread around that. So if you tend to plant a little bit later because in your part of the country or the local weather conditions tend to leave you with very wet soils and you want to have a nice dry seed bed, you don't lose much by planting a shorter maturity date. But if you want to take the risk and plant earlier, or you want to use other inputs that will protect the seed from the cool, wet soil conditions, a variety of organic seed treatments will allow you to choose cultivars and hybrids and varieties that have longer maturity times and still be successful. One can't talk about seed without talking about cover crops. Cover crops, of course, are not grown specifically for harvest, though occasionally they are. More, they are about managing the soils and beginning to use plants to manage pest and disease problems. Primary resource, if you don't have a lot of experience with cover crops, can be obtained from the Sustainable Ag Resource and Education Program and this website. You can get these 2 PDF books, or if you want hard copies, you can order them. The relevant NOP requirements are related to crop rotational practices, highlighting the need to use crop rotation to build soil organic matter, as well as control pests, conserve nutrients, and avoid erosion. With regards to perennial crops, such as blueberries and strawberries, as well as landscape plants, cover crops become important to maintaining soil health, where oftentimes people are using things like clover or other leguminous, low-profile plants in between the perennial woody crop. On the land requirements, we know that organic crops must have defined boundaries and buffer zones, but the reminder is that prohibited materials may not be applied within 3 years prior to the harvest of the first organic crop. So cover crops are sometimes used as a way of building soil organic matter and improving structure as we move from conventional to organic production with no intercropping of a cash crop in the intervening years. Those hay approaches are sometimes used to great success to improve soil quality. So briefly, what are the benefits of cover crops? They help to build and balance fertility. Remember that balanced fertility is good for cash crops and bad for weeds. Legumes can provide additional nitrogen, and the fact that there is more roots active more of the year, that can stimulate greater availability of phosphorus as the cover crop's phosphorus uptake, as it's plowed in, becomes more available in a more balanced release rate to the following cash crop. One of the main reasons that cover crops are used is to suppress weeds, because they can compete with weeds for water, nutrients, and light. Occasionally, there are situations where the cover crop mulches can be used, and here you see an example where there is actually rolled down rye to create a cover crop mulch through which the crop can poke up. So it's not necessarily to plow down and incorporate. Sometimes you can simply crimp and prevent the crop from growing anymore, and you get a mulch. There are a variety of different organic cover crop options. They all have their different pluses and minuses, and this figure actually comes from the handbooks from SARE. And the point that I want to make with this slide is that some of them do a great job at loosening topsoil, while others don't do so well, and others have very little value as a subsoiler, while others are excellent at that. So depending on what your needs are for improving your soil, that should drive the choice of your cover crop input, not just the price of the seed itself. There are risks to using cover crops, and they largely have to do with the timing of planting relative to the cash crop harvest. You need to use a rotation that fits into your growing season, and you need to avoid late harvest of your cash crop, so otherwise you'll get low stand establishment. You want to avoid early harvest and cover crop planting. That can limit the cash crop yields. Remember, I had said that one of the keys to success of organic farming is having timely management of your different inputs, and that's particularly true with cover crops. And the greatest risk to using cover crops is not getting a timely kill or plow down. If you do not destroy the green bridge in a certain amount of time prior to the planting or transplanting of your cover crops, you can increase disease pressure. You can also have problems if your cover crop ends up going to seed, and this is a particular problem with buckwheat and rye, which can become weeds for your cash crop if you do not get suitable destruction of that cover crop and incorporation prior to them going to seed. So again, the disadvantages vary by the cover crop species, and you should take a look at what your needs and what your challenges are to determine which is the best cover crop for your operation. So before I go on to the next section on fertilizers and biofertilizers, I am open to questions and will allow 1 or 2 minutes for people to type in questions before moving on.
Dr. Brian, the only question I have is, are these slides going to be available as a PowerPoint or a PDF file at some point?
Yes, that will be made available immediately after this presentation.
I also have a question here. Can you explain green bridge?
Certainly. So green bridge is the idea that pathogens need a living host to propagate. And one of the pluses of cover crops is that you are covering the land, allowing it to stay in place and avoid erosion. You're keeping green material out there. The problem is that if pathogens that grow on your cash crop also grow on your cover crop, you can amplify those pathogens in advance of planting your cash crop by accident. That is why you need to destroy that cover crop in a sufficient amount of time prior to planting your cash crop. Otherwise, the pathogens will bridge over from the roots and the foliage of the green cover crop onto your young cash crop and cause more problems as opposed to avoiding that problem.
Thank you. And the last question here is, what is the SARE source for these tables?
Let me go back. There were 2 books that I'd shown, and it's the Managing Cover Crops Profitably is where those tables are coming from.
Thank you.
All right. So let's move on now to fertilizers and biofertilizers. With regards to soil fertility and crop nutrient management, the Organic Program Standard states that producers must maintain or improve the physical, chemical, and biological condition of the soil and minimize erosion. There are subsections that regulate the application of raw manure, as well as the process of making compost from animal manures. There are also sections that deal with the limitations on the amount of mined nutrients of certain types that can be applied. Ultimately, the goal is to provide a balanced yet rich nutrient base because, again, going back to the original statement, the simple act of crop removal mines nutrients from the soil. And to maintain healthy, sustainable, long-term productivity, there is a need to return fertility to the soil. An excellent resource for understanding how to build quality soils is the Magdoff and Von Ness book, again available from SARE, called Building Soils for Better Crops. With regards to soil fertility, it's highly recommended that you test first to assess your needs. In fact, the application of added fertility is not allowed without demonstration of need. For major nutrients like N, P, and K, that is determined by crop removal. For minor nutrients and micronutrients, that's determined by evidence of either a soil or a foliar deficiency, which then the producer is allowed to ameliorate by adding in additional nutrients. I highly recommend that you invest in an expert testing service. This can be done through your local land-grant College of Agriculture in some places or local testing services that are recommended by county extension. And there are a number of fact sheets. This one here does make recommendations about how to find a quality testing service. How to interpret those soil test reports. You can get information also from Ohioline, as well as how to begin to assess different aspects of soil quality, such as active fractions of soil organic matter. Now, once you have a demonstrated need, you have to look at the different types of inputs. And these, again, come in several flavors: mined mineral supplements, manure and compost-based products, slaughterhouse byproducts and fish products, algal and plant extracts, microbial inoculants, and mixtures of one or more of the above compositions. Let's talk about each of these types of materials and what their forms are and how they compare to each other. For each of the different types of materials, I will highlight in red which are the most common materials that are purchased, the NPK composition, in other words, the macronutrient composition and whether or not it's declared, also the specific or non-specific nutrients that might be included in those products, whether or not they have microorganisms, and the reminders about nutrient release. One of the realities of providing nutrition into the soil is that it gets transferred from the product to the broader soil and into the crop at varying rates. The form, the timing, and the prevailing environmental conditions determine what that rate of transfer is and how much of the material is lost either to the atmosphere through denitrification or perhaps to the water table in the case of over-fertilization, which rarely happens in organic production systems. However, it can happen within the confines of the NOP rules. With regards to mined mineral supplements, potassium nitrate, rock phosphate, and lime are the most commonly used. For potassium nitrate and phosphate, the composition may be 1 to 30%. There are also mined humates. Now, these are organic carbon sources that act as biostimulants and also alter the cation exchange capacity of soils. So highly degraded soils or sandy soils can be improved by the addition of such products. They rarely contain microorganisms, and as I mentioned broadly, temperature, moisture, crop demands, as well as the structure, whether it's coarse or fine, determines the rate at which it's released and made available. Now let me shift to all of those other products that I like to call biofertilizers because of their biological origin. The first and most widely used are manure and compost-based products. Again, you will find these in bulk loads as well as bagged pellets as well as liquids. They can come from a variety of different farm animals, but they typically do not come from human sewage system that is not allowed under the organic program rules. The NPK composition runs from 1 to 5% by weight. They will contain lots of carbon and variable quantities of micronutrients. So one of the advantages of the biofertilizers is that they are by definition a little bit more balanced and they introduce carbon into the system. The trade-off is they tend to be a little bit more costly by the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that are included. These will contain diverse and abundant microorganisms. So one of the things that you need to be aware of is that some producers market biofertilizers as having certain numbers of microorganisms in them. But not all microorganisms are necessarily beneficial to the plant. Most of them are neutral with regards to nutrient cycling and plant growth, promotion, and control of pests and diseases. They are ineffective. The microorganisms present in compost certainly are involved in nutrient cycling, but beyond that, they have no added function or value that we know of. Slaughterhouse byproducts can include blood, bone, feather, and fish meals. Again, different forms you'll find: bulk loads, powders, liquids, dry pellets. All of these require different types of equipment to deliver. The NPK can be up to 20% by volume. They will have some carbon in them, particularly amongst the feather and fish meals, but not so much amongst the blood and bone meal. Blood and bone meal will have significant amounts of calcium and iron. These are particularly important for managing soil imbalances that can occur with time, but they are also things you have to be cautious of, because you don't want to shift the calcium to magnesium ratio too much towards calcium, or you can again have a loss of efficiency and balance within your soil nutrient supply. They typically do contain, again, abundant numbers of microorganisms, but they are not specifically involved in plant growth promotion by any known mechanism. I highlighted the spectrum of release because particularly fish meals and feather meals can be very rich in nitrogen, and if they are fine grains or liquids and there's a high level of moisture and the pH is right, you'll often be able to smell a very ammonia type release. It's a very quick release that, if it's overloaded, can actually damage young crops. So you must be careful not to overload the soil early in the season. Some of the most expensive biofertilizers are algal, yeast, and plant extracts. Again, you can find a variety of forms, including liquid fermentations and teas. There was a few years ago quite a lot of interest in brewing your own compost teas, because most compost teas do have properties of degraded organic matter and compost as part of them. However, the quality and value of that was highly variable and is not generally recommended to consumers by extension professionals. The NPK composition is often not declared. This is important because these products are often sold as biostimulants, yet they can have up to 5% nitrogen by weight. Well, this is very comparable to applying a compost, but the cost of it is quite a bit higher. So you'll see a quick response sometimes in early stage growth that is due to the added nutrition, not necessarily the other active fractions which are present. They will contain some carbon and other micronutrients, particularly phytohormones in the algal extracts, that can stimulate greater flowering when applied at the right rate at the right time, but could also cause very leggy growth if applied at the wrong rate and at the wrong time. So if you choose to use algal products in particular, pay attention to how your plants respond under your growing conditions, and while the rates that are listed on the products themselves are generally useful, you may have to adjust them for success on your operation. The last area of biofertilizers is the area that I specialize in here at Ohio State, and that's microbial inoculants. Again, the NPK composition is often not declared, but certain formulations can have up to 5% nitrogen by weight. So again, the caution there is not to subscribe all of the value to the early stage growth response. It's the overall yield response that you care about, and the marketable yield response in particular. There are some simple forms of carbon present. Why? Because the microorganisms that are in the inoculants themselves require nutrients, and they are often supplied in the formulation to help them grow once they are delivered to the plant or the soil. Now, there are some new forms that are delivering more active microorganisms that have less carbon, others that provide dormant forms and more carbon. The problem with delivering carbon in the microbial inoculant is you feed everything, and if you happen to have pathogens in the soil, you could be feeding them if you apply at the wrong time and in the wrong amount. Again, there may be some phytohormones in variable quantities, but this is often unknown to the consumer because the microbial inoculants are often sold according to one type of activity, not the multiple activities that might be present. They all do contain microorganisms, but the type, the viability, and the activity can vary greatly. And here is perhaps where the greatest amount of caution is required. Many of the quality producers of microbial inoculants will put expiration dates of 3 to 9 months after production on those packages. Additionally, those packages, while some formulations can tolerate variations in temperature, some actually require refrigeration to maintain viability. If you do not handle the microbial inoculant as specified by the manufacturer within the time frame that the manufacturer says it will be active, then the only thing that you're applying is dead microorganisms and a low level of fertility, which won't deliver the level of return on investment that you're looking for. However, if you do follow their instructions carefully, then you are likely to get a meaningful response. So let's consider what goes on in the field briefly. If you plant two seeds a few inches away from each other, sometimes the plant will grow very vigorously and sometimes less vigorously. This is the natural range that would happen, and it's due to a stochastic and uneven distribution of beneficial microorganisms as well as pathogens and detrimental microorganisms. We apply these inputs to overcome these uneven distributions of biological and chemical resources within the soil. And it's important to remember that inputs may include mineral nutrients, amino acids, and phytohormones that support root growth and development. They may deliver microorganisms that promote plant growth and health through a variety of mechanisms. Again, these are typically the microbial inoculants and microbial biopesticides. And they may contain mixtures of compounds that stimulate soil biology. Again, if they deliver some carbon, whether it's coming in through the manure, the compost, or the formulation of a microbial, that will increase the amount of microbial activity, and that can enhance nutrient cycling, alter the water holding capacity, and or suppress pathogens and pests to promote plant health. So one of the challenges really is to assess whether or not a particular product is going to deliver value in terms of not only increased vegetative growth, but in terms of marketable yield. So I'll come back to that point at the end in terms of how to put the different pieces together. But before I move on to pesticides and pest management inputs, I'd be happy to take any questions regarding fertilizers and biofertilizers.
Excellent. We have one question here. Could you provide specific examples of pathogens and crops where green bridges need to be considered?
Certainly. In every field, there are a mix of opportunistic pathogens, which include Rhizoctonia solani, Fusarium oxysporum, Fusarium solani, Pythium irregularity, and a variety of Phytophthora species like Phytophthora sojae and Phytophthora capsicum. These different pathogens survive on organic matter and thrive and reproduce under varying levels of moisture and temperature conditions. In Ohio, at least, if you plant into a cool, wet soil, you are planting a seed into an environment that is more prone to these pathogens being active, where if you delay planting, you can avoid planting into soils where they're optimally active. If I'm working with a cover crop and I grow up the material, these pathogens will often live not only on the decaying organic matter of the plowdown material, but also propagate earlier in the spring on the roots themselves. So what you get is a bloom of these pathogens, particularly if you're using a cover crop that yield is not particularly important or on your radar screen for, and you have to plow that under. If you plow it under, then the natural succession of microbial ecology takes place, and after a bloom of fungi comes a bloom of bacteria which suppress the activity of those fungi and oomycetes. So this issue of green bridge that you need to watch out for is a general phenomenon, and it has to do with requiring some period of time that allows for significant degradation of the green manure crop or sufficient drying of the soil and crop so that those opportunistic pathogens do not disproportionately attack the newly planted seeds or transplants. As a general rule of thumb, stay away from planting into cool, wet soils for as long as possible, and maximize the amount of time between the plow down of your cover crop and the planting or transplanting. Ideally 4 to 6 weeks, but you can often be successful with as little as 3 weeks, but it depends on the prevailing temperature and moisture conditions in that growing year.
Thank you. You've mentioned many products that need to be purchased, but can a producer use manure from a neighbor's farm or their own, and could they brew a compost tea or a worm casting tea and have the same effects?
With regards to maintaining certification, you need to make sure that the material is applied according to the NOP standards. With regards to the source, if they are a certified organic farm, it's easier. If they're not certified, then the application on your certified land needs to be managed carefully. And I would defer to having you have a conversation with your certifying agency to make sure that your plan is acceptable to them before you implement that. With regards to doing your own on-farm preparation of whether it be worm castings or a compost tea, as long as it's done in an organically acceptable manner, you can do that, but make sure that you know what you're doing, because oftentimes what people who do things on farm aren't taking into account is what is the nutrient composition, what is the pH. They don't analyze the materials well enough. And so when I said that as a general rule, extension agents do not encourage people to develop their own on-farm inputs, it's because of the concern that they don't exert the level of quality control or material management that a company that's producing for commercial sale might.
Thank you. Are there ways to test, or are there indicators of microbial activities in the soil, or would it show up on a soil test?
Right now, there are a variety of tests that are out there that show that there's living organisms there, but the ability of those tests to predict quality are very limited. Von Ness, as part of a program that he developed, uses biological activity and bioassays as one of many soil quality measures. And there are some quick tests like the active organic matter fraction test, which was in that fact sheet that I showed earlier. It's a permanganate test that can give you an indication if you're high, medium, or low with regards to active organic matter, which is related to the amount of microbial activity. However, they're only weak indicators of overall soil quality. And what I recommend is that you consider structure and chemistry first, biology second, in terms of the value of that testing. And that's simply because right now the tests that are available really don't do a good job at predicting outcomes in terms of marketable yield.
All right, thanks. Last question, what's the greatest benefit of humates?
The greatest benefit probably is increasing cation exchange capacity for low CEC soils, but there is some evidence for direct stimulation of root growth under certain conditions, but how universal that is not entirely clear. So it can work really well for some growers and marginally to not at all for others.
Really enjoyed it.
All right. I will go ahead and move on to discussion of organic pesticides and biopesticides. The most important thing to remember is that when it comes to controlling pests, weeds, and disease, there are 3 levels of control and a specific order that they are to be applied according to the NOP rules. The first is to prevent the problem, i.e. through balanced nutrition, good crop rotations, use of certified seed, and good sanitation practices. The second involves the use of mechanical and physical methods wherever possible, because the National Organic Program standards are biased against the use of petroleum-based inputs by design. And so it's a return to methods that rely on machinery that do not change the chemistry of the soil by their application. And then the third is by the application of allowed materials. If the first 2 levels have been done in a good faith effort, then the third level is considered acceptable practice. Now, when people think about certified organic, they often think of an absence of pesticides, but in fact there are pesticides that are able to be used in organic production. For pests and weeds, these include things like diatomaceous earth, iron phosphate, insecticidal soaps, kale and clay, plant extracts like neem, and aromatic oils such as garlic, as well as microbial fermentation products. And in terms of packaged commercial products, they are allowed to be formulated by a list of biochemicals that are generally recognized as safe, but they're also known to have a certain level of pesticidal activity. These compounds are, by definition, chemicals and materials that are not derived from petroleum-based inputs, but are chemicals nonetheless. With regards to plant diseases, lime sulfur, copper sulfate are mined materials. They are chemistries that have been around for a long time that are still widely used and recommended by a number of extension professionals. There are also chemicals that are considered approved exceptions due to the need for control of certain diseases. And the biggest example of this is streptomycin, which is an antibiotic used both in animal agriculture, in conventional systems, for the control of fire blight. However, the overuse of streptomycin on some orchards has led to resistant populations, and so another biochemical called casugamycin has been approved, again, for limited use for a particular problem that must first be demonstrated as a problem on that organic farm before it's allowed to be used. Other materials like potassium bicarbonate and hydrogen peroxide are chemicals that are used for controlling mildews and diverse pathogens, and again you have that same group of plant extracts and list 4 biochemicals. So the take-home message is that these materials are out there, And if you are a certified organic grower, or if you're thinking of becoming a certified organic grower, you need to feel comfortable at least acknowledging that these options are available for use. They are the last chance to control where the level A and B options are used first. Now let's move on to biopesticides. And these are pesticides that are derived from natural sources like plants, animals, and microorganisms. The EPA has a very specific definition of biopesticides, which includes materials that are not allowed for organic production, but we won't go into detail about those today. What I do want to point out is that in the last few years there has been a rapid profusion of these products on the market, and they are now 5% of the total pesticide market. And what's interesting is that their adoption is at about the same rate amongst commercial conventional as well as commercial organic growers. So these materials are viewed as more sustainable options that fit within both types of production systems. When do they fit on a certified organic farm? Again, when the disease is severe and when there are no other options, particularly those related to endogenous resistance and good cultural controls that allow for you to produce the crop that your market wants you to produce. The microbials, as I mentioned, include live beneficial. They may be bacteria, fungi, oomycetes, or nematodes. They inhibit plant disease development through multiple modes of action, though interestingly they're only required to declare one mode of action for EPA registration. Perhaps the most important thing to remember is that their use is constrained by their niche preference. There is oftentimes the recognition that if you're using a live microbial, it's got to fit the niche. It's either got to be a good root colonizer, or it must be able to survive on the leaf, or actively colonize hyperparasitically its target pathogen or pests. More active ingredients are coming online, and at Ohio State University we're actively pursuing both testing programs to develop new biopesticides as well as validation programs run by other faculty to determine their value and utility for vegetable as well as agronomic growers. There are different types of microbial biopesticides, and the active ingredients tend to differ. The biggest two groups are specialists and generalists. The specialists attack very specific groups and only one type of disease or pest, where the generalists will attack multiple types. Typically, the generalists have had the widest level of adoption because most growers experience disease and or pest pressure from a variety of sources, and very rarely in organic systems have only a single problem that needs to be controlled. The biochemicals, as I mentioned, are the plant extracts as well as fermentation products. Pheromone traps are also allowed to be used in certain cases, but generally these are thought of as biochemicals as soft green chemistry. So for those of you who are conventional, who are thinking about moving into organic production, you are likely by habit to be looking at some of the biochemical biopesticides for managing endemic disease and pest pressures. To find out more about what organic pesticides and biopesticides are available for use, I recommend that you check out the IR4 website given on this page. You'll see that there's a label database that allows you to search for products and find those that are specifically labeled for organic production. You are able to search that database for labeled products based on pest, commodity, state, and active ingredient. Remember, these are regulated products if they are registered pesticides, and so there is a state limitation products that are sold on the internet can sometimes cross state lines, but that is technically illegal. And so it really behooves the grower to check with their certifier that the materials that they are considering are in fact allowed to be legally applied within their state for the control of the diseases or pests that are problems on their farm and are acceptable to their organic certifier. So there are a number of strengths and limitations that I won't go over right now due to time, but I would point out that for every type of biopesticide and pesticide, there are strengths and limitations. Those that are highlighted in red are their particular strengths, and those that are highlighted in red are their particular limitations and how they're mitigated. So those of you who choose to take a look at these slides afterwards, that's what that color coding means. Also, the application methods have different strengths and limitations to them. Each of these should be considered as you develop your pest management plan as part of your organic systems plan. There are, in fact, some published resources that came out a few years ago, and I do want to highlight that in 2015, these will be updated for organic growers here in Ohio. Why? Because the number of products has so rapidly expanded, and the data that exists for efficacy has also expanded, and that allows us to make more clear recommendations of the utility of particular materials for different crops, as well as controlling different problems. So before I finish and talk about how to put the pieces together, are there questions about pesticides and biopesticides?
I haven't received any questions yet.
All right. They're probably looking at the time and are wanting me to finish up, so I will move ahead quickly. So with regards to the adoption of inputs, I'm now going to summarize my guidance for organic growers. First, you got to know the National Organic Program rules that apply. You got to know your soil and crop history, because these will vary and determine the relative utility of different approaches. There are some people that operate on floodplains whose nutrients are replenished every few years by natural flooding events, and others who live on sandy knolls of very degraded land that need to be built up. Their approaches to managing fertility, their choices of crop and cultivar, as well as their pest management program will differ significantly. You got to know your growing conditions. The choices that we make as growers are often trade-offs. Do we want a longer growing season? If so, then perhaps we want to not develop a cover crop system that uses the mulch approach. Rather, we plow down, but we have to make sure that the schedule that we would plow down allows for a long enough time before planting or transplanting so as not to encourage the green bridge of pathogens and pests. You also have to know your own limits in terms of what you're willing to pay and what your expectations are for various inputs. With every cost, you expect some sort of return if you're going to stay in business and be profitable. What is the level of investment that you're willing to go in for? And what is the amount of risk that you're willing to take, knowing that for every input there is a probability of success, but rarely a guarantee of a particular monetary value. And lastly, you have to know and compare the different options, because there's always more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to balance your fertility. There's more than one way to set up a rotation. There's more than one way to control pests and diseases. What are each of those options? What are the trade-offs in terms of investment, of equipment requirements, and time requirements? And what value do they bring to your operation. General resources, again, the Guide for Organic Crop Producers is available through the National Organic Program. There's also a very wonderful online textbook called Organic Risk Management that particularly focuses on pest management issues in the upper Midwest out of the University of Minnesota that I highly recommend you go to. With regards to the NOP rules, just to summarize, you want to maintain and improve the physical, chemical, and biological condition. With regards to manures, there's the 120-day pre-harvest rule. With compost, you want to make sure that you're using allowable feedstocks, that you're getting sustained heating and mixing, and that particularly depending on where your market outlet is, you may need to invest in testing for coliform and salmonella counts. This is not an issue yet for small-scale operations, but those who are feeding into large-scale grocery operations and distributors are finding that the food safety regulations are extending now into the organic operations as well. Again, with regards to these, you can look at the OMRI certification, but you should check with your local certifier to make sure that the materials that you're considering for fertility are allowed. With regards to pest management, prevention's the key, mechanical and physical methods first, then move on to the materials. With regards to soil testing, every 1 to 3 years is highly recommended depending on the intensity and complexity of production. You want to obtain your baseline data on soil type, structure, and fertility and organic matter to see how that changes with time to make sure that you're building. And take notes of the diseases and pest problems that you have each year. That will help you plan which inputs might be of value to you. There's always some loss, but typically it's less than 5% of your marketable yield if you are using proper rotations, if you have good balanced soil fertility, and you have good management practices. But there will be years when you have epidemics that are not due to your management, but due to a set of weather conditions that just predispose your crop to greater losses. Track those, pay attention to those, know what your challenges are for your crops. That will help you choose the appropriate inputs for their management. The other thing that I tell people is to identify where your trouble spots are, and if you're going to test and manage those separately, do so recognizing that there are multiple options. I had a grower one time who had one part of his field that always got sclerotinia white mold, and it was due to the location and its proximity to a tree line. And I said, you know, your option is to fight that disease in that part of the field, recognizing that it could spread to the rest of the field given the particular weather conditions in a given year, or to simply not farm that close to the tree line. That's the trade-off. Those are the risks that he has to take. Those are the decisions that only you can make as a producer. So that's really about knowing your growing conditions. In terms of overall marketable yield, compare your productivity to neighbors and county averages and your own past history to see if you are, in fact, building capacity, building productivity in a sustainable way. Sometimes higher productivity is not achievable, and people continue to add in inputs with very low return on investment. So before you invest in those inputs, ask yourself if higher productivity is likely given what you are currently doing. Knowing your limits is about knowing how things fit in your operation, your own management style, your equipment base, looking at the costs and the likely benefits of that input. And then if you know that you can manage one or more additional inputs, then check out your options. Identify multiple products that might fit, compare the costs of those different sources, and evaluate the return on investment when you use them. Oftentimes growers would like to get from their extension agents, well, what is my likely return if I use this particular material? And your extension agent and most scientists will not have that number for you because there's so much variation from year to year and from operation to operation in terms of what value it might bring. Crop consultants, certified crop consultants can certainly help with that because they can look very intensively at your operation and guide you towards better inputs. But you can do that yourself if you're willing to invest the time in your own training. And there's also the possibility of learning how to do your own on-farm testing. And in the year ahead, there is discussion between OEFFA and the OARDC about how we can perhaps develop an organic growers research network that will help people who want to evaluate a variety of inputs for different uses to connect with researchers to get data that's meaningful for their farm, on their farm. So stay tuned, and hopefully you'll see that develop in the year ahead. In the meantime, you can get efficacy data from industry. Of course, these are the same people who are selling you the product, so you should look upon it skeptically, but they are provided because at this point there is no central database for all of this efficacy data. You can get data from Extension, ARS, and university researchers, but you will find that it tends to be very variable because the conditions of experiments are very variable, and it's often very hard to look at that primary literature as a non-expert and make a decision. If there's 60 studies that show value and 20 studies that don't, are you going to have seen all 80 of those, or are you just going to look and see, wow, it's variable and I don't know if it's going to provide a return? It's very difficult to get into that literature and make those decisions. Focus on the extension resources from SARE and from your county extension offices, and they are the ones who will provide you the best guidance. Secondarily, rely on the interpretations from certified crop advisors. But be wary, some of them are also suppliers and distributors for the exact type of inputs that they are evaluating your farm for in terms of its needs. So with that, I will just say that overall, input products can vary greatly in quality, scientific data support, and value to the grower. So pay attention to what your operation needs and evaluate whether or not inputs can provide greater productivity and greater income in the future. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions, and I leave this up here to allow you to contact me individually as you have specific questions, particularly as they relate to microbial inoculants and biopesticides.
Thank you, Dr. Brian. We have a few questions. There is a common assumption that organically approved inputs are safer for humans and the environment. Could you comment on the risks and hazards associated with organically approved pesticides?
Sure. So with regards to the list of organic pesticides that I had up there earlier, let me go back to a few of those. You'll actually see that many of those materials do not seem particularly of concern. Diatomaceous earth, kaolin clay, iron phosphate, these materials, as a rule, are less toxic and less carcinogenic than many chemical pesticides. Chlorothalonil, Captan, Mancozeb as examples of 3 of the most widely used fungicides are B2 carcinogens. None of these materials are known to be carcinogenic. There are concerns about the aromatic oils and plant extracts that are on the labels, and this is again why it is very good practice to pay attention to the labels and follow the precautions that are on, because if they are registered materials, then the information that's on that label will guide you to the safe use and application. But as a general rule, the level of toxicity and cancer risk is much less, and that's simply because they, as a rule, are made from materials that are of a natural source.
Thank you. This is a question on cover crops. If we're not using organic no-till using the crimp roller, is tillage the best method for suppressing these cover crops?
The choice of using cover crops gets intermingled with the choice of whether or not one should be using no-till or not. Certainly tillage can increase erosion and it can destroy structure. On certain lands that can be detrimental, but on many lands that can be beneficial. So I think the proper way to approach that question is to ask first, is tillage the right thing for your land and the slopes that you have? If the answer is no, then cover crops that you create a mulch layer that holds on would probably be preferable to you if it dries out and that material does not act as a green bridge. If, however, you tend to have land that stays wet till late in the spring, incorporation and tillage may be the best way to create a seed bed that is suitably dry and of good tilth for the rapid growth of your cash crop.
Do you recommend trace elemental testing?
Any other questions? As a rule, I would say that until you see deficiencies within your cash crops, or if you have a situation where you are consistently under-yielding your neighbors, I do not see a great need for micronutrient testing.
Thank you, Dr. Brian McSpadden Gardener of the Ohio State University Organic Farm Research. Appreciate you being here on the webinar. I'd like to remind all participants that these webinars are recorded and archived on our website, www.oeffa.org, and Dr. Brian is kind enough to supply us a PDF form of these slides. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.